You just don't understand, the young alien girl cried, her voice trembling with fear and frustration. Her bright, alien green eyes were wide, filled with tears that she couldn't shed. No matter how hard she tried to explain, no one ever listened. Her hands were bound by glowing energy chains, glowing in a painful, pulsating rhythm, dragging her back to the cell in the dark, cold metallic ship. Her legs were weak, but she pushed herself forward, each step a struggle. Every muscle in her body was bruised, her energy drained, but they didn't care. They never cared. You can't fight it, little one. No one can. The deep voice of the captain, Varix, rumbled from behind her, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the cold floor. His reptilian eyes glowed with a harsh red light, an intimidation tactic he loved to use. You don't belong in this place. You were chosen because you're weaker. You'll never be strong enough to fight it. You will break. The young alien girl, known as Thira, swallowed her tears. She had heard that before, every day for weeks, but something inside her was still fighting. The aliens had abducted her from her peaceful home, and now they used her as a pawn in their cruel experiments. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a symbol. They called her a failure, a weak specimen of her kind. You don't know who I am, she whispered, her voice shaking with determination. You think I'm weak, but I'm stronger than you think. You'll see. One day you'll see. The captain just chuckled, a harsh, dry sound that echoed across the chamber. You don't know what you're up against. You're too young, too soft. But don't worry. We'll teach you the real meaning of power. Thira's thoughts swirled with confusion and anger. She couldn't understand why they were doing this to her. What had she done wrong? Was it because she was different from them? Different in a way they couldn't even comprehend? She was still so young, barely an adolescent in the eyes of her kind. She hadn't even had the chance to find out who she was meant to be. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, agonizing pull on the chains. They had arrived at the training chamber, the room where she had spent countless days being tortured, tested, and manipulated. This room was a nightmare for anyone who dared to step inside it. The alien beings in charge, all cold and calculated, had no intention of ever letting her go. But then, just as the door slid open, a sudden voice echoed through the corridors, soft but urgent. A voice she had never heard before. Stop. It was so unexpected that for a moment, everyone froze. Even the towering Varix. A human? A human voice, coming from deep inside the ship? Thira's heart skipped a beat. Who was that? Could it be? Do you really think this is how things should be? The human voice spoke again. It was calm, but full of undeniable strength. The tone held no fear, no hesitation. A figure stepped out of the shadows, human in appearance, but something about him was different. He was tall, with strong features and a confident stride that immediately demanded attention. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if assessing the situation. His skin had an unusual gleam, not the pale or dark tones humans usually had, but a sort of reflective quality that shimmered with an almost otherworldly gleam. You don't belong here, Varix sneered. His voice was thick with hatred. This doesn't concern you. Stay out of this, human. The human didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze moved to Thira, who was still on her knees, exhausted and defeated. Something shifted in her chest as she saw the compassion in his eyes. He didn't look at her with pity, nor did he regard her as a subject. No, his gaze was full of understanding, as if he saw the real Thira, not just the broken being they had turned her into. I'm not here to fight you, the human said, turning his attention back to the captain. I'm here to help her. Help? Varix laughed cruelly. She's a prisoner, human. There's nothing you can do. She's already broken. We've tried everything. The human nodded slowly, his expression never wavering. You think you can break her? You have no idea what she's capable of. His voice was low and steady, but there was power in his words, something that resonated deep within the walls of the ship. You've underestimated her. Thira's heart raced. Who was this human? How did he know what she was capable of? The last few weeks had been a blur of pain and confusion, but in that moment, when their eyes met, a small spark of hope flickered inside her chest. Before Varix could respond, the human stepped forward. He didn't rush. He moved with the kind of confidence that made even the cruelest of captors think twice. Thira had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. She was no longer alone. The human stepped closer, his eyes locking with Thira's, and in that brief moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection. It wasn't pity or sympathy, but something deeper, something she hadn't felt in so long, understanding. The weight of her chains suddenly seemed lighter, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't consumed by the dread of what came next. Varix, however, wasn't as moved. His reptilian face twisted into a snarl, his claws curling in fury. "You've made a grave mistake, human," he growled, taking a step forward. "This is not your fight. Leave now, or face the consequences." The human didn't flinch. He wasn't intimidated by the towering alien, nor did he seem worried about what might happen next. His posture was strong, but calm, like someone who had seen more danger than this and faced it without hesitation. "I'm not here to fight," the human repeated, his voice calm, yet laced with authority. "I'm here to give her something you can't take from her. Freedom." The words lingered in the air, and for a split second, there was an odd silence, like the entire ship had held its breath. Even Varix seemed to hesitate, as if the weight of the human's words had finally struck a chord. Then, the silence shattered with a loud, guttural laugh from Varix. "Freedom," he scoffed, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light of the chamber. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This girl, this specimen, she's ours, and she will never be free. Not while we have control over her. You think your human words mean anything to us?" Thira's heart sank as Varix's words echoed in her mind. She had been told this over and over. She had been told she was nothing, that she was weak, a failure, that no matter what she tried, she could never escape. But now, there was this human, standing up for her. How? How could he think she was worth saving? For the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering if it was true. Could she still have freedom? Could she still change her fate? The human took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You underestimate her," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but there was power in it, an undeniable certainty. "You think she's weak, but what you don't understand is that you've been pushing her to her limits. And now, you've pushed her far enough." With a sudden motion, the human extended his hand toward Thira. She didn't hesitate. She had been alone for so long, subjected to the torment of the aliens, but this human's presence, his trust, was a lifeline she didn't want to let go of. Slowly, she reached out, her trembling fingers brushing against his. A spark of energy coursed through her hand, a sensation she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. In that moment, she understood. There was something about the human, something different about him. He wasn't just offering help. He was offering her a chance to reconnect with herself, with the power she had long since forgotten. "You're not broken," the human said softly, his voice filled with a quiet strength that made her heart race. "You're stronger than you know." Varix's eyes narrowed as he observed the exchange. He growled low, clearly irritated by the scene unfolding before him. "Enough," he barked, reaching out to activate the control panel embedded in the wall. Before Thira could fully comprehend what was happening, the ship's lights flickered, and the energy that had been binding her to the floor began to pulse violently. The chains hummed with a crackling energy, threatening to tear her apart. But in the instant before the pain could intensify, the human moved quickly. He pushed a button on his wristband, and the chains shattered with a sharp, metallic screech, falling to the ground like broken fragments. For a moment, everything went silent. Thira looked at her hands, freed for the first time in weeks, and a sense of awe washed over her. She had never felt this powerful, this alive. She looked back at the human, her heart racing in disbelief. How was this possible? How could someone like him, someone so different from her, understand? "We don't have much time," the human said, urgency creeping into his voice. "They'll come for you. We need to move." Thira nodded, still in a daze. She didn't fully understand what had just happened, but the one thing she knew for certain was that this human, this stranger, had given her a second chance. And for the first time, she believed that freedom wasn't just a dream. It was real. The two of them began to move quickly through the ship's narrow, dimly lit corridors. The alien technology around them pulsed with cold, mechanical energy, but Thira barely noticed. Her mind was focused on one thing: escape. As they reached a narrow hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, heavy, deliberate. The aliens were coming. "We're not safe yet," the human said, pulling her towards an airlock. "Stay close." Thira did as instructed, keeping her pace in sync with his. The fear was creeping back, but this time, it wasn't overwhelming. There was something different about the way the human moved. His confidence, his unwavering determination. It was as if nothing could break him. They reached the airlock, and the human's fingers flew over a control panel, inputting a code. The airlock doors slowly slid open, revealing the vast emptiness of space. "We're almost there," the human muttered, glancing behind them. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. They had to hurry. Just as the last door to the airlock opened, Varix's voice rang out, filled with fury. "You think you can escape? You think she's worth saving? You're both fools." But the human didn't stop. He was already leading Thira into the ship's escape pod, his movements swift and precise. "Buckle up," he said, glancing at her one last time. "This is our only shot." Thira obeyed, securing herself into the seat. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the weight of the situation began to sink in. They were fleeing, escaping, but she had no idea where they were going, or even what would happen next. The pod's engines roared to life, and they shot away from the alien ship at breakneck speed, leaving the tormenting walls of their prison behind. For the first time in what felt like forever, Thira breathed freely, her heart still racing, but no longer with fear. The human beside her had given her more than freedom. He had given her hope, and for the first time, she truly believed that she was capable of so much more than the aliens had ever allowed her to see. They were speeding through the cold, dark vacuum of space, the vast expanse of stars stretching out before them. Thira's heart was still pounding, but now, it was a mix of exhilaration and uncertainty. The pod felt strangely comforting, like a cocoon. She was free, but she had no idea what came next. No plan, no clear direction, just the knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. Beside her, the human seemed unfazed by the perilous journey ahead. His eyes remained focused on the control panel in front of him, his hands steady, as if piloting a spaceship through enemy territory was a routine task. It was clear he wasn't just some random stranger. He was someone who had been through this before, someone who knew how to survive against impossible odds. Thira, still trying to wrap her mind around everything that had happened, glanced at him. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Why did you help me?" The human glanced at her briefly, his eyes softening for a moment. "My name's Eli," he said simply. "And as for why, well, I couldn't just stand by and watch you suffer. I've seen enough of that in my life. I couldn't let it happen to you too." Thira's brow furrowed. "But I'm nothing special. I'm just a failed experiment. I'm not like you. I don't even know what I am anymore." Eli's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently touch her shoulder. "Don't think like that," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "You're more than what they told you. They wanted to break you, to make you feel small. But I can see it. There's strength in you, Thira. More strength than you realize." Thira shook her head, her eyes filling with frustration. "You don't know what they did to me. You don't know how they used me, how they tore me apart. I'm not even sure who I am anymore." "You're still you," Eli said firmly. "They can't take that away from you. And they won't. You don't need to be defined by them. You're not a failure, Thira. You're still learning, still growing. You can be whoever you want to be." Thira was silent for a moment, the words sinking into her mind. She didn't know how to process them. All her life, she had been told she was weak, defective, not worthy of anything more than punishment. And now, here was this human, someone who had no reason to care, telling her that she wasn't broken. The pod jolted slightly, and the sound of alarms filled the cabin. Eli's calm demeanor didn't change. He quickly tapped a few controls, his fingers flying over the buttons with practiced ease. "We've got company," he muttered under his breath, not looking at Thira. "They're already sending pursuit ships after us." Thira's heart leapt into her throat. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. They were being chased. The aliens weren't going to let her go so easily. She had been nothing more than a specimen to them, a tool for their experiments. And now, their anger would be focused on her, and Eli, who had just made the mistake of rescuing her. "What do we do now?" Thira asked, panic creeping into her voice. Her hands were clammy, her pulse quickening. The thought of being caught again, dragged back to that hellish ship, made her stomach churn with dread. Eli didn't answer immediately. His eyes were focused entirely on the view screen, where several alien ships were now closing in on them. They were fast, sleek, and deadly, with weapons that could rip through the pod like paper. Thira clenched her fists. "Eli, we can't outrun them. We're not fast enough. What's the plan?" For a moment, Eli didn't respond. He seemed to be contemplating something, his brow furrowed, his jaw tight. Then, finally, he turned to her with a look that was both grim and resolute. "We fight." Thira blinked. "Fight? How? We're just two people in a tiny pod against an entire fleet." Eli's lips curled into a faint, confident smile. "We might be small, but I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. And if I'm right, we can make it out of this together." Thira's mind raced. She wasn't a fighter. She had never been trained to fight, to defend herself. But Eli had saved her once. Maybe, just maybe, he could teach her to fight for herself. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly, but there was a new spark in her eyes. She wasn't the scared, broken girl she had been moments ago. She had been given a chance to take control of her destiny. Eli looked at her, his gaze filled with understanding. "I'm not asking you to be a soldier, Thira, but you have something the aliens can't comprehend. You have your own power. You've just got to find it. Trust yourself." Before she could respond, the ship lurched again as enemy ships opened fire, their weapons hitting the pod's shields with a loud, shaking thud. The pod rattled, and the lights flickered. Eli slammed his hand down on the controls, activating a set of shields on the pod that glowed with a vibrant blue hue. "Hold on," he shouted. Thira's heart raced as she gripped the seat, her eyes wide with fear. The ship rocked violently as another shot collided with their shields. She could feel the pressure in her chest, the adrenaline surging through her veins. This was real. The danger was real. Eli's voice broke through the chaos. "We've got one shot at this, Thira. I need you to trust me. The alien ships are synchronized. We can disrupt their communications if we hit the right signal. You'll need to work the console next to you. Can you do that?" Thira's eyes darted to the panel next to her. It looked complicated, foreign, completely beyond her ability to understand. But then she looked at Eli. His calm, steady expression grounded her. "Just focus," Eli said, his voice almost a whisper now. "You're stronger than you think. Just focus." She nodded, her hands trembling, but she reached toward the console. The alien technology was alien, yes, but something about it felt familiar, almost like a whisper in the back of her mind. Her fingers hovered over the buttons. She didn't know what she was doing, but she followed her instinct. She pressed one, then another, feeling the hum of energy pulsing through the console. And then, with a deep breath, she pressed one final button. Suddenly, the alien ships flickered on the view screen. Their movements became erratic, and their weapons stopped firing. The ships seemed to lose their coordination, drifting off course. Thira couldn't believe it. She had done it. "We did it!" Thira exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. Eli's grin was wide, a mix of pride and relief. "See? I knew you had it in you." The pod shook once more as the last alien ship tried to make a desperate lunge at them, but the sudden disruption left it vulnerable. Eli pushed the pod's engines to their limit, sending them barreling through space, dodging the remaining ships with swift, calculated moves. Thira felt a rush of adrenaline, her mind spinning. She had just helped defeat the enemy. She had been the one to turn the tide, to take control of the situation, and it felt incredible. As the pursuit ships faded into the distance, their threat finally neutralized, Eli glanced at her once more. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, his voice serious again. "But we've got time. Time to figure out what comes next. And we'll do it together." For the first time in a long time, Thira didn't feel like a failure. She didn't feel broken. She didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a warrior. And she was ready for whatever came next.